Hello and welcome to the first of many conversations to be had at The Nest on various topics. If you have an idea, feel free to send it to ahsthenest@gmail.com and we will respond and think about your ideas. This conversation will be about the ongoing national gun debate, and the views expressed here are not the views of The Nest nor of the school. They are solely the views of myself and Troy. I'm Chris, this is Troy Norton. Do you want to say anything about this, or are we ready to go?
I would like to say that I'm very excited about having the opportunity to work with these video opportunities and to have these conversations, and hopefully we can really make something out of this. So as far as the gun conversation is concerned, we have obviously the issues of whether it is just a social thing as far as the media is concerned, or whether it's a political thing as far as the parties are concerned and the politicians, or if it's something else entirely. Chris, what do you think about that?
Well, you're right in saying that everybody's concerned in this issue. Obviously, the media has their own stake in it. They are funded by certain parties that do have a vested interest in certain things, and they do obviously have an obligation to disseminating the news, which obviously the massacres are a part of that. Politicians do obviously also have a moral obligation, as they are representatives of the people, to aid the people in their distress and in this situation, the massacres. And the overall gun deaths, I think a point I want to touch on is the fact that there's a difference between the massacres that we've seen at Newtown and in Aurora and the overall gun deaths, because for many reasons. First of all, the weapons used in the massacres are different from the weapons used in the majority of other gun homicides. So going back to what you said, I do think everybody has a certain interest in this. I don't think that anybody's interests are disparate in any way. I think this is the philosophies that are different.
So you think it's a matter of philosophies here at hand?
Yeah, I think that obviously, as many of you know, and as obviously as Troy know, many people on the so-called right, I don't want to box people in, but many people on the right have a fear of people taking their guns. And there are, of course, many people on the left who have that same fear. The radical left, I'm going to say. And the institutionalized left generally has the idea that gun control is a good thing, and I think both sides have a good intention. Obviously, I don't think anybody, or at least the overwhelming majority of people, do not have the intention of going out and harming people or actually trying to take people's guns away for their own self-interest. So I think we all have good intentions. I just think it's the philosophies that are headbutting.
Right, and moving on to a more practical side of it, I think a large issue is going to be defining what exactly constitutes an assault weapon as opposed to just a conventional gun to which we all have the Second Amendment right to possess. So at what point do you think do we have to clarify that this is an assault weapon, there's no need for a civilian to own this?
Right, you bring up a good point, and that was a fault of the New York State legislation proposed by Cuomo.
The SAFE Act.
Yeah, the SAFE Act, or at least a problem seen by many people, not necessarily by anybody here. But I think what we need to see is that guns are usually broken up into three categories. You have handguns, you have rifles, and you have shotguns. And the long guns are the rifles and the shotguns. I'm not really a gun expert in any way. I don't claim to be, so I'm not exactly sure how we should define assault weapons. Again, if you have any ideas as to how we should define assault weapons, please feel free to share that at ahsthenest.
Yeah, send us an email, ahsthenest@gmail.com, or leave a comment. We'll set up a comment page for you all to comment on.
Yeah, and I think, so if we need to have a broader conversation about this, and I obviously don't know how we should define assault weapons, but I think what should be included in that is a larger magazine, and also the possibility of automatic weapons, I think, should be included in that, at the very least. But as to what we should do about the assault weapons is a different question. I mean, defining assault weapons and then defining what we should do about the assault weapons are two different problems that need to be faced.
Right, there. Now, as far as tackling, perhaps the term gun culture is thrown around pretty loosely, is that something we need to look at, kind of weeding that out of American culture, and how do you think we would go about doing that?
Right. You bring up a good point. What I think, so this is my own opinion here, it's not very widely shared, but I think that the gun culture, quote-unquote gun culture, is just another manifestation of a broader culture in America of war and of violence, because if you think about it, in terms of imagery, we've had wars on drugs, wars on women, war on Christmas, wars on poverty,
It's like
etc.
we're obsessed with war.
Yeah, in a way. I don't know if that's just a coincidence or if that's actually indicative of a larger problem. And if it is indicative of a larger problem, I think that the gun culture is an integral part of that. So if we're trying to break down or weaken this gun culture, this culture of violence, we also need to look at the broader implications of the war culture of America.
Right. Because war and other such violence are very easily glorified by the media, and that's certainly a problem that we're going to have to tackle moving forward. How do we go on tackling this and not so much glorifying it, but rather addressing ways to correct the problems at hand?
I have an idea here. I think I want to touch on what I was saying earlier about the distinction between the massacres and the other gun homicides, where assault weapons are used less than 2% of the time in gun homicides. And I think that needs to be widely shared and widely known, because the gun debate that we are having on a national level and in the national media tends to be focused on assault weapons and what we should do with the assault weapons and how to solve these massacres that we're having. And obviously that's an issue that needs to be focused and talked about. But we also need to focus on the 98% plus percent of gun homicides that aren't caused or aren't used, assault weapons aren't used in those homicides. And I think the issue with that, the root cause of those homicides would be poverty, in my opinion. And poverty has been linked, correlated to gun homicides before.
Right.
And I think that needs to be addressed in a much broader national level, just in the same way that the gun culture needs to be addressed in a much broader national war culture. So I think the implications of this gun debate are much broader than we seem to think.
Right, they are. There are certainly socioeconomic factors here. There are even educational factors. There are factors within the family. Of course, there are also mental health factors, which are often mentioned in the media, which are a very big part of this. And all of that goes beyond just the regulation and distribution of assault weapons and other guns. So that's something we're going to need to tackle, in addition to the philosophical and the practical sides of this.
And I think, like you mentioned, mental health, billions of dollars have been stripped away from the mental health industry in the past couple of years. Partly due to the economy, partly due to the sequestration efforts, not only this most recent one. And that's obviously an issue. The mental health system we had before these cuts happened was not perfect, and there should have been reforms to that. But cutting money is the wrong direction to go in this situation.
That's like moving backwards.
Exactly. And obviously that, again, has broader implications. Not only is the degradation of the mental health system affecting homicide rates, but it's affecting the general population, the culture, the family units.
Right.
So I think, in a much broader sense, the solving of the problem of mental health will not only help the gun issue, but it will help broader issues on a national level.
Right, there are a variety of socioeconomic and cultural effects that the mental health problem, should we make a concerted effort to resolving that would fix those issues that are arising. You brought up an interesting point in mentioning not just this most recent sequestration, but other ones before that. What effects do you think those had on the gun issue in particular?
That's an interesting question. I hadn't really thought about that. But as you're seeing it now, obviously, as you said, there have been multiple sequestration efforts, not only by the name sequestration, because only the recent cut was by the name sequestration. But all cuts up until this point, and all cuts that will happen, will exacerbate poverty. That's been shown. And as I said before, poverty has been correlated with gun deaths. And you can have, there are multiple psychological theories behind that, most of which have very true aspects to them. And so I think poverty can induce learned helplessness. So in that sense, people are driven to crime, and to gun crimes. And also, in a sense, poverty drives people because they don't have an economic opportunity. They don't have many economic opportunities, so they're kind of driven to drug crime, which is also linked to gun crime. So I think the one side effect, probably not foreseen by many politicians and by many economists, excuse me, is exacerbation of the gun issue.
Right, which is obviously a factor of poverty, as you said, and there are a variety of ways of going about fixing that, or at least tackling it, but the sequesters and the cuts aren't going to cut it. We need to, if anything, invest more money and more effort and more of our attention onto these issues and not turn a blind eye to them. So it seems almost as if we're moving in the wrong direction at this particular point in time.
And in terms of, I have a feeling that many people will agree theoretically with your idea of pouring funding into these institutions that need to be funded and revitalized. But I think people may have a problem logistically with how we should fund that. And I think that one way to address that, in my opinion, is the war on drugs. It needs to be dismantled, and the money used to militarize police and the money used to capture low-time criminals that really do not affect the broader population. That money should be put into the mental health institutions. It should be put into the education system, and it should be put into the government budget for social welfare programs that decrease poverty and alleviate poverty.
Right. So as you said, there are a variety of outlets into which we're pouring this money presently that we could really be using that money a lot more productively toward the gun issue, toward the education issue, towards a variety of issues which we seem to not be paying as much attention as we should be at this time.
And I would like a short point about the war on drugs. Up to 2 million jobs are directly associated with the prison industrial complex, and so the dismantling of the war on drugs would probably not be feasibly conducted by the government, because politicians have vested interest in, obviously, the economy. And if you suddenly have 2 million people out of work, that's obviously going to harm the economy. And so politicians do not have a real incentive to solve the war on drugs. And as the people who are most affected by the war on drugs have the smallest voice in politics, they're the poorest and they're the ones incarcerated, I think that this won't be solved by politicians. And I think the war on drugs needs to be solved by a broader mass movement for civil rights. And also I think that ties into another point I wanted to make about the gun culture. The gun culture itself cannot be solved without a broader mass movement towards less violence and more understanding for our fellow human beings.
Right, there's only so much that the government and other such institutions can really, or rather will really do at this point to correct these issues. We as a people need to take the stand and demand that the changes that have to occur. We need to put our foot down, and we need to realize what's going to be the best for ourselves, for the country, for the world even, in terms of the gun issues and in terms of all of the other factors that we've discussed.
Right, I completely agree with you, and I think many good ideas have been brought up in this conversation here. We may have another segment depending on what people would like to send us, so if you have any ideas as to what another conversation should be about, or what other topics on this conversation should be, please send your ideas to ahsthenest@gmail.com, and we'll get right back to you. Thanks.
Thank you for watching.